Talkin TIDF.
Welcome to another edition of Talkin TIDF. I'm Cameron.
And I'm Stefanie.
And today we are joined by another amazing programmer for TIDF. This time we're with CHUNG Peihua. And we're going to talk a little bit about a really interesting bit of selecting that she was involved with revolving around Harvard's SEL program. So welcome, and could you quickly tell us, what does SEL stand for?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Peihua, and I'm one of the programmers at TIDF. Yeah. And the SEL stands for the Sensory Ethnography Lab at Harvard University.
All right, Sensory Ethnography Lab. That might sound a bit abstract, right, Stefanie? Do you think most people would know exactly what that means just by those words?
In the beginning, had no idea what it means. It sounds quite academic. It sounds like a laboratory. What are you doing there in this lab? So I was kind of, curious what the Sensory Ethnographic Lab has to do with filmmaking. But maybe before we start talking about this focus program, maybe Peihua, tell us a little bit about your own background and how when you started working for the TIDF, and your first experience with the TIDF.
Yeah, why I'm here, talking about these programs. Yeah, my first experience with TIDF actually started as a moviegoer, just like everyone else. I first attended TIDF in 2014. At that time, I was actually working as an associate producer for a documentary. Yeah, but before that, I worked at different film festivals. But at that time, like everyone who's at their 20s, you started to want to change your career path a little bit. So I started to do the production for 1 or 2 years. But anyways, I get to know TIDF as an audience member. But I joined the TIDF team in 2016 as a subtitle coordinator.
Do you have a background in film studies? I mean, your university degree, was it film studies?
No, I majored in literature in university. But in 2018, I decided to learn more about film studies, learn more about how to see films and how to talk about films. So I went to film studies at Amsterdam University. Yeah, but it was after I started to work at TIDF. Yeah.
Okay, and then when you came back, you rejoined the TIDF in your current position.
Yeah, and this time joining as a programming team member. Yeah, and my role at the TIDF, I'm mainly responsible for the out of competition section. Yeah, so I focus more on the thematic and curatorial explorations, and mainly for the historical and retrospective of older films. Yeah.
Yeah, when I sort of opened the program booklet this year and when I discovered that the Sensory Ethnographic Lab was focus program of this year's edition, I was quite excited because I've seen films which will be screened again. This is a retrospective where films will be shown that I have never seen before or which I haven't seen on a big screen. And that is one thing I think about this program. These films, I think, have to be seen on a big screen. That's a completely different experience if you watch them at home on your small computer. You really have to watch them on a big screen. So I'm really excited that we have this chance this year to watch SEL films on a big screen.
It's a very exciting film movement, but I think a lot of our listeners still might want to know, what do we mean when we're saying Sensory Ethnography Lab? So maybe let's go word by word. Sensory. What's sensory about these films? Aren't most films sensory? What's really different about the ways that these filmmakers are practicing documentary?
Okay. I think the major differences between the conventional ethnography films and the sensory ethnography is that the filmmakers associated with the SEL encouraging you to sense the world, the reality, not with your eyes, but with your ears, with your body. When you sit at the cinema, you kind of like experience the film with your body. So it's not only about like receiving the information the filmmaker delivered to you through language, through subtitles, voiceover, or narration, interview. They tend to use sound and like different visual elements to create this environment that you can sense and you can feel and get to know the environment, the setting, the people, the way of life better. I would say that is the major difference between the SL or the so-called sensory ethnography with the conventional ethnography filmmaking.
Well, and I think it might also help to think about ethnographic filmmaking in connection to ethnographic writing.
Yeah.
Especially the fact that it's also tied with the university as an institution. There's this long history of Western academics going to parts of the world that they're less familiar with and that they think that their readers are less familiar with, and putting into words their perception of what they're seeing and maybe trying to tell you, well, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Which I think to me feels very familiar to that more traditional type of ethnographic film that you're also talking about. So for instance, you guys also program in Dead Birds, which is not an SCL work, but there is an SCL work that's critiquing and engaging with it. So maybe that might be a great example that we could use to sort of make this comparison between a classical ethnographic film and an SCL ethnography. So what's the story with Dead Birds? It's a pretty influential film.
Yeah. Did you watch that before, or did you heard about that? Because I know it's like a classic.
Well, I know about it not necessarily from filmmakers, but actually from anthropologists, because I know it's one of these works that I feel like is infamous within filmmaking circles, specifically because of the relationship between sound and image, and presenting sounds as if they're sync sound, but they're not really sync sound, and what, how do we want to match these things together? And I feel like that adds an ethical dilemma to doing ethnographic work that is even more complex than when we're just thinking about written ethnography. And so I should probably explain here. Dead Birds, which is a 1964 documentary, is dealing with local communities in West Papua, and it is trying to show you a specific way of life, but it's been critiqued for filtering it through sort of this lens of these Harvard anthropologists. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, because Harvard University has a very strong tradition of anthropology and ethnography filmmaking. And one of the most famous names is Robert Garner, who is the filmmaker of Dead Birds. Yeah. So in Dead Birds, like Cam just said, that it portrays the traditional culture and the rituals of Dani people in New Guinea. Yeah. I don't think it's called New Guinea nowadays. It's
Western New Guinea. New Guinea is on the eastern side of Papua, just Papua New Guinea, and then...
But like the conventional ethnography film that you can imagine, the filmmaker used the narration to try to interpret this traditional culture for these Dani people. And also, the narration is very beautifully written, but somehow it's the representation of these groups of people could be controversial. Yeah. And one of the examples is that the woman, the Dani woman, the voice of Dani woman are like totally excluded from this film. But it makes no sense, right? Because of course there are women in this group, but somehow they are excluded in the narrative of the film. So people started to talk about the controversial and how problematic it is. But the reason that we want to curate this film in this program is because of the other film called Exploitation Content, made in 2020. Yeah. And this film is very special because it consists entirely with the sonic archive left by the exploitation team of Harvard University who produced Dead Birds. Yeah. So it's kind of like in retrospective to provide the other way to see Dani people's culture and tradition, and also kind of like criticize what was excluded in Dead Birds. And actually Cam helped us to do the transcription of the film exposition content. So maybe you can talk about your experience of working through the transcription. What's your observations about this film and the relationship of it between it and the Dead Birds?
Yeah, and I also want to correct myself. I misstated the year that Dead Birds was produced. It actually came out in 1963, and then it won some awards in 1964. But expedition content, just like how the film is dealing with some interesting ethical questions related to what's left and what's left out, I actually found that was a salient issue in transcribing it, because the film presents sound of people talking. A lot of it is in English. A lot of it's not in English. And there's also different accents of English. And it does provide intertitles, or essentially subtitles, but it's providing text on screen to help you in some places where it wants you to understand what you might not fully understand, or maybe help you make out something that's not fully heard, maybe due to background noise. However, to make this film accessible to an audience in Taiwan, obviously you need subtitles.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, though, to make subtitles, we base them off of another language's subtitles. So the original language, so you want to transcribe the quote-unquote original language that the film is in, and then create subtitles off of that. But I was very conscious making the transcription of this film that I was giving you my perception of it. Yeah. And so I can't speak for all speakers of English, because there's many different accents, there's many different ways of perceiving it. And so I was very conscious of, as I was transcribing, of everything that I was hearing was also how I distinguish between what is sound, what is language, what is intelligible to me. And I felt a lot of angst as I was working through this. And so I guess that's to anyone who goes and sees it this year, I feel a little 不好意思.
Well, then get your perception of
Yeah, it's being filtered through it. But that's true. Whenever you bring text to screen, you are adding this perspective. But nonetheless, there are places where there will be neither English nor Chinese subtitles. So there's still a lot of places where it will challenge people to think about how they're perceiving the relationship between sound as sound and sound as language, and sort of the messiness of that. But people think transcription is just a straightforward, I just need to transcribe what I hear. It's never as simple as that. And so I have a little trepidation in terms of how it gets received.
I know, but it's kind of like a necessary evil, because I think this film is meant to invite you to listen, like understand what's going on by listening. But because of this like language barrier, that will be impossible. So we really need to do a Chinese subtitles. So let's just like what Cam said, so we really need to do that. But somehow I still think like this film, by its approach, it could be the best example of what the sensory ethnography can mean, because you see nothing. So you can only understand, or maybe not understand, just perceive what's going on by listening. Yeah. So I would say that it's a very good example of what the SEO trying to do, because conventional ethnography filmmaking relies heavily on language and text, probably because the original purpose, the primary goal of anthropology and ethnography filmmaking is to provide information and to explain cultures. But the filmmakers in SEO, they try to challenge this kind of a tradition, because there are a bunch of people who has a training of anthropology, but also they are deeply engaged with art, with philosophy, with cinema. So they kind of go back to cinema itself. Cinema is a different medium from written representation, from languages and from words. So what's so special about cinema? What's so special about the visual languages and sonic language can do to influence your perception about reality and the world? So I would say that it is kind of a core concept of what SEO is trying to do, to highlight how cinema itself as a medium, as a special medium, can do to influence your way of perceiving this world. Yeah.
Well, if it comes to sound, I think that TIDF has always, or for a long time, put a lot of emphasis on the importance of sound in cinema, also in previous editions, I remember. And I think this time the sound designer, the famous SEL sound designer,
and also the co-director of exposition content, the film we just mentioned.
Yeah, they will be coming. So it's Ernst Karel, right? And,
actually, Ernst is not visiting TIDF.
No, but he will be. Well, maybe you can explain how he is involved. And he is also doing a production with a Taiwan-based artist.
Yeah, like in addition to the films that we are showing at this program, we are also organizing this like listening session, and there will be a list of recordings. Some are like filmed recordings, and some are maybe excerpt from the soundtrack of a film. Yeah, so Earth co-curate this list with the other sound artist called Yannick, who is based in Taiwan. So we will invite the audiences to the cinema, but just listen to what they curated. So there will be no images in the cinema. So we think it's a good way to highlight the important role of sound in SEL practices. Yeah. So although Earth couldn't come, we are trying to highlight what he has been doing and how he has been like working with SEL filmmakers. And also there will be a virtual Q&A after exposition content. Yeah. So there will be chance to talk with the artist after the films.
Well, and then in addition to sound, I've noticed in a lot of the films on a visual aesthetic level, it's also dealing with these questions of tactility, of space. And I was actually curious, Stefanie, when you just earlier brought up your experience with Leviathan and seasickness. Could you talk a little bit about that film and what, like, that's no mean feat, because there are plenty of films set at sea that almost like smooth off the edges of the experience of being at sea and make it this perfectly like, oh, what this, this beautiful boat voyage. What is the filming style in Leviathan, maybe, just to give people a preview?
Well, actually, I cannot tell you too much because I left earlier. It is really an experience as if you were as one of the workers on the boat. You are exposed to the dirtiness, to the darkness, to the movement of the boat, to the slimy fish corpses, you almost seem to smell the dead fish, the sea, the ocean. It is really a sensory experience. For me, it was too much of a sensory experience because I couldn't take the movement of the camera. Yeah. So I really got seasick, as if I was on the boat myself. That's actually later I read about the film, how it was done. It seems they really went on the boat for 3 weeks. And they also got seasick, terribly seasick. They had very sort of innovative ideas on how to film this and where to fix the cameras, how to record the sound. So it's very interesting to read about how the film was produced, or maybe we will have the chance actually to ask one of the directors, right? Lucien Castan-Taylor. He's the director of the SEL, and he will be coming to Taiwan.
Yeah, and about the Leviathan, they actually attach the GoPro cameras on the ship, on the fishing net. So you kind of have these very different perspective of seeing this environment and seeing how people work and how the ship moves on the sea. So that's why you feel a little bit seasick there. But somehow, I think it's also a very good example of what the SEL people are trying to do, because you couldn't sense that how people on the ship feel without using these very specific technology and ways of shooting. Yeah. So instead of telling you what it's like to work on the ship, they actually invite you to feel and to sense what it's like. And apparently it works, so you feel
very much
sick
so.
and couldn't complete the film. And like you said, one of the filmmakers of this film, Lucien, and he is probably the most famous figure for SEL. Actually, SEL began as just like a course called Sensory Ethnography, taught by Lucien, and it developed into a sustained lab over time. Yeah, so he is the key figure and the director of everything. And he and the co-director Verena, this duo is probably the most famous SEL filmmakers around the world, especially after Leviathan was released and there were wings, it was very successful around the festival circuit. So people tend to recognize, see SEL as these two duo, Verena and Lucien. But somehow there are other filmmakers who are also associated with SEL, and that's what this program wants to feature, to show the diversity of SEL approach, even though that they are under this umbrella called sensory, but they do develop different ways of filmmaking, and they also have a different concerns and issues that they care. So in this program, we really want to include this variety of filmmaking styles in this program. Yeah.
The SEL was set up in 2006, so that's now almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, do you think that it has had an impact on the more recent generation of Taiwan ethnographic filmmakers?
I would say definitely yes, yeah. Because these films, SEL films, was screened also at Ethnography Film Festival in Taiwan too. And I know that in some university, they also have so-called sensory ethnography class. Yeah, but maybe it's more about how to analyze this kind of filmmaking. Yeah, but so I think for more recent films, SEL definitely have their impact. But after all, I think the North American ethnography films has a very different tradition with ethnography films in Taiwan. So maybe there would be some conversation and dialogue between these two different groups. But I would say that there are definitely some influences, yeah, especially for more recent works, yeah.
I think that might be a great place for us to pivot to other parts of the program this year, and especially this topic of Taiwan having its own ethnographic tradition, because ethnography is often, I think people will give definitions related to, documenting the ways and beliefs of a society or group of people, but oftentimes there's a way in which sometimes it's more open than others. I think in the past, people were less self-reflexive and less open about the position that they were coming from, but it's often someone coming from one position trying to deal with the difference of people in another position. Mm-hmm. Often this is, resulted in people from, when we think of the, classic Western ethnographic tradition, people from Europe and North America going to places in the global south and trying to sort of quote unquote make sense of what they're seeing, but sometimes maybe imposing their own ideological reading in the process. But that also existed in East Asia in its own form of people trying to make sense out of difference. And I think in the context of Taiwan, it's hard not to think about colonial Japanese documentaries that came out and were trying to sort of document what Taiwan was, who was living there. That's come up in previous iterations of TIDF, right?
Yeah. You know TIDF very well. Yeah. So for the last edition, we actually show some films that was made by Japanese scientists, researchers during colonial Japanese period.
So this year, while you're not necessarily featuring Japanese sort of scientific or ethnographic filmmaking from the colonial period, you are engaging with both Taiwanese as well as Japanese documentary from later periods that is thinking about back during the Japanese colonial period and thinking specifically about how people lived under a colonial structure, but maybe were surveilled and were understood, and specifically thinking about the ways in which both ethnically Han people in Taiwan as well as indigenous people in Taiwan might have experienced colonialism, because I feel like both were subject to the Japanese ethnographic lens. And then also sort of cultural differences between Han people and indigenous people has continued to be a very complicated topic in contemporary Taiwanese society. So then moving off this theme of Taiwan's colonial past, this year you also added a special section for the Taiwan Spectrum series that is explicitly dealing with the experience of Taiwanese people during World War II and in relation to the Japanese army. Could you talk a little bit about the selection process of the films that were included this time?
Yeah, so in this Taiwan Spectrum section, we try to highlight that the experience of the so-called Japanese soldier for Taiwanese people could be various. Because in the past, we tend to think that we are kind of like, we tend to oversimplify the experience as a group of like victims who were forced to fight this war as a Japanese soldier. But after doing research, you find that there are actually different experiences on different people. Every individual might experience that very differently, especially for the indigenous people. They might have like total different experience with the Han Taiwanese. So in this program, we try to put like a different experience and try to be more inclusive as possible to show that during this period, this is actually an experience that couldn't be oversimplified. And by different films and by different stories of these individuals.
My assumption, you can tell me if this is right, if also part of what led to this year's programming was the success of From Island to Island, and how it not only did it win the Golden Horse, it started all these conversations. And I know that the director, he was constantly struggling and getting more and more material and putting it together, and there was a lot of criticism around the fact that it turned into a 5-hour work, and you know, did it need to be that long? Should it have been broken up? But there's this way in which it's the massive scale through which it communicates the complexity of the topic that you guys are getting at, which is sort of experiences in relation to Japan's building of their army during World War II or the Pacific War. And even then, that 5-hour film does not get everything. But I think that's the conceit of any, no one documentary can get everything.
Of course not.
And so I sense that you, with this programming, you're helping show a lot of the other different perspectives and different experiences that exist in conversation with such a massive film.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that because Liao Kehua is from Malaysia, so his perspective is very different from the Taiwanese perspective. Because usually we thought, like in the past, we tend to think like we are the victim of the World War II, right? Because Taiwan was the one who was colonized by Japan, so we were forced to fight this war as Japanese. But from the perspective of Malaysia, they see a lot of Taiwanese people helping Japanese soldiers and doing something bad in Malaysia and Southeast Asia too. So the narrative, the historical narrative, is totally different from what we were used to. So I want to mention that because why From Island to Island is so special to us and to TIDF is that it provides a very different perspective to view this history anew. So from this film, we started to think about, are we like just victims of the history of the war? Of course, we suffer from that. But also there are like different ways of seeing the story, of seeing the history. So we started to explore a little bit about what different people's experience as a Japanese soldier during that time. So as I mentioned previously, we try to be as inclusive as possible and trying to tell people that this could be a very diverse experience for Taiwanese people. And also by this program, we want to show that for nowadays, we always think like when you say Taiwanese, it feels like a very definite and a single like a definition of being a Taiwanese. But if we go back to history, you'll find like it's actually there is a process of becoming Taiwanese. And there were a lot of different experiences get involved in this becoming. So we really want to feature this process and how different it could be. So that's why in this program we try to show like different stories from different positions. Yeah.
I feel it's very much the strength of the TIDF again, right? To shed the light on different, or to give different perspectives, give different ways of understanding, seeing people in different roles. And yeah, that is not telling you what's right and wrong, yeah? But
yeah, like maybe it's
really
just another way to an
another
alternative way to see
yeah,
history or the circle reality.
Yeah, and of understanding. Yeah.
I think what some people might be surprised in there, not only are you getting different perspectives from different Taiwanese filmmakers, but you're also including some Japanese documentaries. Some later, you have the 1972 documentary Asia is One.
Yeah.
What was the thought process there? Because again, it's going to give you a different voice, but yeah, talk a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, I think we want to put Taiwan in a broader map. Because in the past, when we talk about these, like after war, like World War II or after World War II experience, we always like focus what's going on in the island, on the island, right? But actually, Taiwan is part of the East Asia history, and the relationship between Taiwan and, for example, Southeast Asia, can be shown in from island to island. Yeah, but also Taiwan has, of course, we are part of this like. Japanese empire during World War II and pre-World War II. Yeah, so we really want to see like how the relationship between Taiwan and, for example, Japan or maybe Okinawa. Yeah. So by showing Asia is One, we are trying to put Taiwan in the, like a broader scope of seeing this history of war and of going into war. Yeah. And also in Asia is One, we also see these filmmakers visiting indigenous people in Taiwan. And there were people who went to war during World War II as Japanese. By the interviews with these indigenous people, we see how the war and how colonial period influenced these people. So we think that would be a good like counterpart of the other films shown in this section. And maybe can bring a broader view about this period. So that's why we decided to include Asia is One in the section 2.
I think it's a really fascinating group of films that you brought together this year. And the reason I wanted to bring it up in this conversation with the SEL and ethnography is just there are different lenses, I think, through which documentary can help us think about different experiences among different communities or different societies or different cultures. And sometimes a shared theme, sort of different cultures in relation to war. That's another tactic or another way in which you can think about that. I really hope that viewers this year get a chance to see multiple films from each of these programs, because I think, again, with each of the programs, you're going to get the best sense of it if you get the chance to go to multiple films. If you do get to only see one, that's great. And I know sometimes that's the reality because of the tickets selling out so fast. But if you can see multiple films within a program and get a sense of why these films are being programmed, alongside each other.
I'm very happy that you bring it up, because I think like one thing that differ film festival to like movie going, like regular movie going, is that we provide these contacts. Like we put things together, we put films together, and we try to make sense of it, why we would like to make this collective of films. So like I mentioned, that I really encourage people come to see multiple films and trying to explore why we would like to put them together, what's the context and what are the reasons. I think you can get that if you come to like more than one films, and you will get a sense of that. Yeah.
Yeah, for people who are fans of ethnographic film like me, I would also like to draw attention to a film screened in the Taiwan Reels section. It's, I would say, an ethnographic classic by Hu Tai Li and Li Daoming, Songs of Past Thai. So that is, you shouldn't miss the chance to watch the film. Well, in the very end, Peihua, we always ask our guests to give recommendations for 2 films, any section of the festival. So what would you recommend?
Yeah, I will choose one that is not in the SEO section. I hope that will be okay. Yeah.
Sure.
My recommendation would be Punishment Park in the special presentation section. And I would say this is a very timely work considering what's happening in the United States right now. Because the film is shot in the style called like a docudrama. So it's basically fiction, but somehow all the performers, actors are like non-professional actors. And the film presents a scenario of a political activist who were put on trial. So they were given the choice between life imprisonment and going to a place called Punishment Park. And then in this park, it's almost like a Hunger Game, that you have to escape from the police. And if you made it to the end, the goal where a national flag of the United States was, you will gain freedom. So the whole film is about how these activists trying to reach the final goal and escaping from the police.
So I have to watch this film. You already convinced me.
Yeah, it's a very, you can feel the tense, how intense the film is, and the style and approach is very interesting as well. And most importantly, what I think it's like super timely if you consider what's going on right now. Yeah.
Well, I want to add, so it was shot in 1971, correct?
Yeah.
So this is, I always find it fascinating when films that were shot decades ago gain interesting resonance with another time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why cinema can be so interesting.
Exactly. And why old cinema, especially, it's always, new stuff is great, but old stuff is also great. We should go see it as much as we can. Oh, and one last thing I also want to add is we talked a little about, there are events related to SEL with visiting filmmakers, but again, there are also events for a lot of the films across sections, and there are Q&As and other things. So in addition to screenings, don't forget that you can go enjoy some other really cool spaces for engaging with cinema.
Yeah, and we have 2 guests from the SEO section who are Lucian and JP Snedecke, who will come to the festival physically. Yeah, so you will get a chance to meet these filmmakers and ask the questions about the films. Yeah, so don't miss it.
Well, Peihua, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so delightful.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for making this podcast happen.